how much of the stuff we're going through do we share at home? How much of the pressure that I'm feeling or the things that I'm trying to work through and process through do I share at home with my wife or maybe my kids? We know that these are the kinds of things that cause a lot of conflict at home when we're not sure what to do about them. We're not sure how to handle them. And so that's what Jake and I are going to talk about today. Jake, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I think in terms of how much do I share at home, really, this conversation started for me specifically. There's things that I operate in, and there's things that my wife operate in that are like her zones and my zones, right? So for me, it's like our finances is really my zone, right? That's the thing that I'm operating in right now. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because there's times, one of them being right now, where like we're a little tight on our finances. And that causes an internal knot in my thoughts because I'm really not sure how much do I expose to her. Me being wanting to be the leader, me wanting to be like, hey, I got this handled, right? Uh, that I don't want to just like open up the dirty laundry because that's my job. I want to own that. I want to steward that. I want to be that person for her. And I want to take on the brunt, right? That's what we're called to do. But I also, the hard part that I have is like when I take it all on, then there's this disconnect on, specifically for the sake of me using this example for our finances. It's like if she wants to go out to dinner, and in the back of my brain, I'm like, "Ooh, we can't do that right now. We can't do it because there. Then it causes this internal rift. She goes, "Oh well, we can't go to dinner. Why? You just never want to go to dinner, right?" So that is like I just don't know what to do with that. It's something that I'm personally with. I'm sure a lot of it is. I mean, you said it for your kids. Like your kids could be the same situation. Like why can't we go to Disney World this weekend or whatever it might be, right? And so that's kind of what I'm working through.
Good. And I think there's lots of people who can relate. And I think it's a very common circumstance, a very common thing, challenge. And I think to me, all these things are just peeling layers back until we get to the root. We've talked about that many times. And so I think that at the root of this, to me at least, seems to be the question is if I'm trying to lead my home, how do I take on whatever I'm supposed to take on without then saddling other people in my home with that thing? And I think that's where we have to sort of step way back and we have to zoom way out. And we have to, like we've talked about in previous conversations, we have to understand that to the degree we think it's our responsibility and the outcomes are up to us, are the degree to which they will feel heavy and scary and frustrating. And then to the degree which we have the opportunity to pass that fear or that feeling along to others. And so I'm going to use a interesting analogy. It's probably different than what you might expect here, but it's how I really believe. One of the reasons that I have such a disdain for centralized government is because in my experience, as I watch, governments who tend to want more and more power in the areas that I've worked in the past to exhibit that power is one of the things they ultimately all have in common is they go, oh, well, the general population's just too dumb or too fearful or too ignorant or too whatever to actually be able to handle the information. So we're going to keep it behind the curtain and we're just going to tell them to trust us to do what's best. And they think that that's leadership. And I don't think that that's leadership. Now, somebody could listen to this or watch this and have a difference of opinion. That's fine. But the reality is I think that um, real leadership is having confidence that we're going to go in the right direction. Real leadership is making those hard decisions. Real leadership, it involves all of those things, but it also involves a level of transparency and a level of authenticity. And so when I think about your example with your wife and the finances and the going out to dinner, I mean, I would tell you like, hey, if you guys aren't sitting down as a family at least once a week at this stage of your life, and you're not going through the finances together, that's a problem because real leadership is not you saying, "Don't worry, honey, I'm going to handle all this and you're never going to have to worry about it." That's like you just being the man and not being a team. And I don't think that's what male leadership is about at all. I think male leadership is like, and here's what I wrote down. I think in this instance, like we can share the truth with the people in our families. But when we share the truth baked in fear, that's when there's a problem. When we share the truth baked in confidence and faith, that's a whole different scenario. So you could sit down, you could look at your finances, and you could say, hey, the reality of our finances is right now, we can't afford an extra dinner a week if we're going out because that might be $500 or whatever. And we just don't have it. But here's my confidence. I'm doing these things. We're going in this way. God's never failed us. He's always provided. We can create the same environment in our home, in other people's. So like to me, it's like I think I'm not a woman, so I'm not here to speak for women. But in my conversations with my wife over the years, it's like what she's conveyed to me is, um, it's our confidence or our fear that we're that affects them the most, that affects my wife the most. And so I can sit down with my wife and I can share the realities of what we're facing. I could even sit down with my kids. Now I'm not saying we share everything with our kids, but to the degree I feel like I need to share something with my kids, I can do it in such a way that what I'm conveying to them is a message of faith and not a message of fear. And I think oftentimes, if we haven't dealt with our own fears, with our own insecurities, with our own struggles, right, then what we'll do is we'll just pass them down to the next generation, or we'll pass them over to our wife. And to me, that's how we end up with what we would call generational iniquity. It's like the frictions that we haven't been able to process through, the fears we haven't been able to overcome, are the very ones that we just keep passing down over and over and over again.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think to me, I oftentimes will see it as a burden. And most of the times I see it as a burden that I want to carry so my wife doesn't have to carry it, right? That's kind of how I was picturing it. But when I think of it in the way that you just said it, like presenting it in confidence and faith versus in fear and lack, like the fear and lack is what makes it feel like a burden, right? The fear that we might not have enough money ever, right? Like that is the burden that I'm trying to carry for us. And that's why I feel uncomfortable sharing it with her. Can you agree, like do you see that? Or am I like, is it still a burden? Is it still like maybe it's not finances, maybe it's for your kids, I've been on the other side of it where it's like deaths, right? Deaths in the family is always a hard conversation to have, like either with your children or with your loved ones. It's like when I was always told, like, if we had a dog that died, it was like most of the time, my mom, what she would do is, she might go put the dog down and be like, "Hey, we lost the dog," right? And it was not like that was her burden. Her burden was she had to go do the hard part of putting the dog down. And I think like that's where I see that from, is like this burdensome idea where I don't want to share that burden with my wife.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I'm going to ask you a question. How can you determine or discern between what's a burden and what's an opportunity?
That is a great question. It's probably hard because I mean, you could probably see every situation as a burden versus an opportunity. I can't say I can answer that off the top of my head.
Yeah, so like I think I said this in our last conversation. So Tony Robbins says we get to pick, what do we focus on and what does it mean? Like those are two things we can choose. And then he also says where your focus goes, your energy flows. So I think the difference between a burden and an opportunity is simply the lens through which we look at it. Right? So you could sit there and you could say, I'm not knowing how to pay the bills this month feels like a heavy burden, which is true. But it can also feel like a massive opportunity for innovation, for creativity, for a breakthrough, for God to show up and do something that people thought was impossible. Like if you look at it through the lens of the Lord, right? I think oftentimes the reason that we find ourselves in impossible predicaments is so that He can show up and do the very thing that we all think is impossible. And when we have faith, He gets to do that. And so for me, I look at it and I go, this whole concept of, hey, I want to I want to shelter my wife from this thing that I think is a burden because I think it's going to protect her, is kind of like what the governments do. They're like, I'm going to shelter the people from the truth because I don't want them to have to worry about it. I don't think they're equipped or capable or able to handle um, this information, when the reality is, like, if they would actually do it a different way, the very people they're trying to, quote, protect and shelter might actually have some good ideas on how to solve the actual conundrum. And so I think for me, when I think of these things, it's like, listen, you can choose, and so can I. I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to us all. Like, we can choose that the financial struggles or challenges that we face are burdens and burdensome, which is easy. Pessimism takes no faith. It takes no work. It's like literally the easiest thing we can do is just look at something and go, I have no control over this. We're screwed. Right. And that's what a burden often feels like. Or we can look at it and say, oh, well, maybe I do have some influence over this, but I'm just going to choose to think this is the worst thing in the world and I'm going to carry it. And this is my cross and this is horrible. But we can also choose to look at it and say, oh, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for God to show up. This is an opportunity for me to grow my skills. This is an opportunity for me to think creatively and come up with ways to do things that I never thought possible, other people didn't think were possible. And then if we choose, right, that we're going to focus on the exact same things, but they're going to mean something completely different than we thought before, then all of a sudden the energy that's flowing in that direction is going to go into solving the problem, right? And leading like we really want to lead, as opposed to like exacerbating the burden and the pain and ultimately leading people where is probably really not that worth going.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think for me, I see those kinds of conversations that I'm, you know, having with my wife or my family or whatever it might be. Sometimes like I am, like how you say, I am looking confidently. I am in faith, right? I know like there's gonna be a time shortly that we're not gonna be in this situation anymore, right? Like we'll be able to go out to dinner. But sometimes my salesmanship isn't that good, right? Sometimes I'm like I'm not able to inspire my family with that same feelings. Like, is that like how can you do that better? It's because it's not. I think like sometimes it's like confidence, but it's like to the extent that I show her or my family how we're gonna get there is also to the extent that I can maybe see how I could get her on board on this confident idea, this faith-based idea, right? Instead of, oftentimes, like you say, it's like for me, yes, that's step one, choosing the faith confidence side versus the pessimist fear side. But also, like, is it my job to get them on board? Is that like me to sell that idea? Or is it like how can I do that better?
Well, I think how you do it better depends on the individual situation, but I think generally speaking, a leader isn't trying to. I don't think a good leader is trying to push people along. I think a great leader is doing things in such a way that people just really want to come along. And so, one of the ways that I think about this, and I wrote it down as you were talking, is, um, the first question we learn to ask is why, and the question we never stop asking, most of us at least, is why. And so I think one of the things that I've seen over and over that I think leaders do really poorly, or people who are put in positions of leadership, is they just tell people, hey, we're doing it this way because I said so, or we're doing it this way, just trust me. It's like, how about you actually make it make sense to the person? That's the influence, that's the persuasion, that's the articulation, that's the vision casting. That's like, hey, babe, right now we gotta hatch it down. We don't have the money right at this moment to go to dinner out there every week or whatever. But let me show you. Let me show you what we're doing on the side. Let me show you the progress that I think we're making. Let me like because she's gonna immediately go, well, why? I see you doing this thing over here, or why I don't see you doing this thing over here. Like the questions that she's asking in her brain are like, why and then justify. I'm not saying your wife, but generally
Hmm.
speaking, us as humans. And I think your job as the leader, as the communicator in this example, is answering objections before they come, right? We know so well what the people are thinking because we've thought about it from their perspective, right? That we actually in our communications, in our vision casting, we're actually answering those questions. And so then I think, and this is where I think in a lot of relationships it breaks down. Eventually, if you keep saying that thing and the fruit isn't becoming visible, that's when people can start to say, well, you've been telling me that for 3 years. And that's where I think, again, we have to step back and say, like, when I'm casting a vision, when I'm telling my spouse or my kids or my employees or whatever that we're going into a certain place and that we're going on this journey and here's the destination. Like, are we actually doing our part or are we just talking about it? Because there is a difference, right? Like, it's easy to talk about these things. It's easy to even to get people hyped up about them and riled up about them. It's a lot harder to actually make the hard decisions, do the hard things, and get there. And somebody might listen to this and say, yeah, but Zach, you just said that, it's about turning burdens into opportunities, and now you're talking about hard things. It's like, yeah, well, they both exist. right? You can look at an opportunity as a series of hard things that need to be done, hard decisions that need to be made, and it still creates an opportunity. Like when I go buy real estate, it's an opportunity. And yet I know there's lots of hard things that need to be executed in order to turn that opportunity into reality. And I think it's really no different in our personal lives, in our relationships, in the way that we parent, the way that we are husbands, the way that we are wives.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, one question I would have is like, is there anything that you would refrain from sharing to not load that burden on anybody else? Um, like for me, I think of maybe things that happened in my childhood that are often coming up. It's like that I had to take on that burden, or that, the financial situation is one, but like even a layer deeper. If you were sharing those burdens, if you make that now her burden or your family's burden, is that something that you can do, or is it something that you should refrain from doing? Because like I'm just having a hard time personally seeing how that would be an opportunity.
Well, listen, I'm not a counselor and I'm not going to tell somebody that they should share everything with everyone
Mm,
all the time. I don't think that that's the answer, but I can tell you that in my marriage, there's nothing that I don't feel comfortable sharing with my wife, and I think that she would say the same thing. And listen, I'm not prescribing that for everybody else. Like if somebody needs to go talk to a counselor or their pastor or whatever, like they can do it. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, they should be asking the Lord. Me and my relationship, not offering advice to other people when I say this, is like I think that part of it is if I'm a good leader, I'm also leading by teaching the people under my care how also to look at things as burdens or opportunities and how we get the choice. And so, again, if I'm sharing something about my past, right, that's a real thing to someone in my family, there's a way to do it where it becomes a burden on them. And usually that's actually casting my fear upon them, casting my care upon them. There's also a way to do it where I spin it to show how actually this thing is creating an opportunity. So they interpret it as something that's positive, something I've learned from, something I've grown from. And so I feel like you could take almost anything. And if it was
mm,
presented the right way because you actually believed it that way, it can be used for good. That's why I think the Bible says the enemy meant it for evil and God used it for good. That's why I think the Bible says, cast all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. So, what we often do, because we don't know how to deal with that internal friction, we're looking for someone who will care as much as we do, and there isn't anybody except the Lord. Then, what we do is we cast our cares on other people, we cast our hurt on other people, we cast our fear on other people, and then it's a burden to them. Instead of saying, hey, when I share this with you, I'm sharing this with you because I want you to see how this thing that looks so terrible from the outside, God turned around and used it for good. I want you to see this situation that seems impossible right now is really not that different than like when the Israelites were being chased by Pharaoh towards the Red Sea. And they're all like, we're going to die. And they said, oh, I guess I'll have to part the waters. And then not only I'll have to part the waters, you'll have to walk millions of people through them. And then when you get to the other side, I'll crash the waters on your enemy. It's like, this is what I'm trying to say. And I'm not here to say I'm perfect at it because Lord knows I'm not. These are just as much reminders for me as they are for anybody who might watch or listen to this. But, I think as it relates to how much do we share with the people at home, I'm not saying that's not the right question. I'm just saying it's not the most important question. I think the most important question is, in what way are we sharing the things that we're sharing with those at home? Because the way in which we share it actually, I think, has more influence on what it does and how it's used than the thing we share in and of itself. So, with that, uh, appreciate you guys watching. So hopefully, you gained something from this conversation. These are real things that Jake and I are wrestling through. These are real things that are really speaking to us. And I just always assume, hey, if they spoke to me, if they spoke to Jake, there's probably somebody else out there that they will speak to as well. So if anything in here spoke to you, if it resonated, um, we'd love to hear about it. Maybe share a comment down below or send us a private message wherever you're consuming this. And if you found it helpful, if you could share it with somebody, that'd be awesome. Don't forget to hit that like button. And you can always learn more, You can go a little bit further at the website, kosturos.com, Kosturos.com. Again, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.